Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. With us today to talk about ingredient innovations to reduce the production footprint is Dr. Steve Lerner, Senior Scientific and Business Advisor for Novonesis Animal Health BioSolutions. Welcome, Dr. Lerner. Great to have you with us here today.
Hi, Sarah. Very happy to be here.
For those of you that are tuning in from our audience, we thank you for joining us as well. If you have any questions, feel free to post those there in the chat area on your screen. If you're joining us from social media, feel free to post your questions directly in your social feed. So, Steve, let's start by focusing on the global challenge, the global front here. With the rising global demand for animal protein, what pressures are created for producers and the planet?
Sarah, when you consider that our global demand for protein in 1960s was about 70 million metric tons. Today, it's over 368 million metric tons. That's a 5 times increase. And that's great for those of us involved in animal agriculture. But we recognize that puts tremendous pressure on our feed grains, on cropland, on our resources, water, et cetera, and the climate. If you think about it, every pound of meat, every gallon of milk, every dozen eggs carries with it a feed cost and also an environmental footprint. So improving feed efficiency becomes our most powerful lever when it comes to sustainable growth.
So you mentioned feed, and that really seems to fit then in that production animal picture when you look at it overall. Is that kind of how you see that? Is that the most important component, would you say?
Well, feed accounts for about 70% of the impact of livestock on greenhouse gas production, on water and land resources. It drives fertilizer use, the expansion of croplands, energy consumption in the production of feed and food. Because feed dominates this environmental footprint, it's small improvements in feed conversion and feed efficiency that really cascade through the system, because every less ton of grain required, every reduction in inputs and lower emissions is a positive impact on our environment. So in my opinion, feed efficiency is where the conversation on sustainability and on profitability meet.
So how best then do we go about finding that balance between productivity, profitability, and responsibility? How do we do that so that we know that it makes good business sense?
I look at sustainability really as an efficiency equation. Better nutrition use means less input for the same amount of output. You get lower feed costs per unit mass of meat, milk, and eggs, and lower emissions. When you look at performance, really performance, however you measure that commonly, is the single biggest driver of sustainability. When you start considering that sustainability is not just a regulatory burden, but it is something that is the natural consequence of what we should be doing in animal agriculture anyway, then everyone wins. So in that equation, efficiency is absolutely the link between productivity and profitability and responsibility. And it's in one simple continuous system.
So you mentioned efficiency. That's bigger than nutrition, it sounds like. It's kind of the big deal when we look at all of this.
Oh, nutrition certainly delivers ingredients. It delivers the nutrients to the animal. But it's biology that determines how the animal uses those nutrients that are contained in those ingredients. So when you think about it, efficiency really is all about the biology of production animal agriculture. Biology is the dependency on a proper functioning microbiome, on a proper functioning lining of the intestinal tract, on metabolism that is driving the animal towards growth or the production of eggs or milk. So clearly, nutrition is one component, but I love to think about production animals really as bioreactors. We put good nutrition and input in. We hope they do with it what they will to ensure proper, efficient production of meat, milk, and eggs. But that concept that it really is a system where you're feeding a bioreactor takes us well beyond just what's in the ration. So we need to think about the biology as well as the nutrient content of our feed.
So walk us through that, the biological pathway from gut to performance. How does that flow? How does that look?
Well, certainly feed absolutely influences what happens in the microbiome. We try to look at feed innovations. We'll talk about probiotics and enzymes a little bit later, but the trillions upon trillions of microorganisms that live within the digestive system of the animal, the microbiome, if you will, certainly has an impact on the way the gut functions. A proper functioning microbiome ensures the integrity of the gut to prevent leaky gut problems. It helps the animal maintain a proper immune balance and immune responsiveness to the challenges in their environment. And the microbiome helps shape metabolism. And if you look at integrity and immunity and metabolism, these are huge drivers when it comes to performance, however you measure that. When we put all of these things together, we talk about the microbiome gut organ axis. And this axis, whether you're talking about the lungs or the liver or many times the brain, this is where you have the impact of proper nutrition, the microbiome and its impact on the gut itself, but then that cascade that ensures proper metabolism, proper mental health and well-being, and all of those things drive performance. And again, when you can more efficiently produce meat, milk, and eggs, you lower that impact on the environmental footprint in that production system.
So then what mechanisms should nutritionists and veterinarians be aware of when they're looking at feed innovations and trying to decide if it's right for them?
Well, clearly the focus should always be on those typical metrics, measures of the various industries. We focus on feed conversion because we know it's important. We focus on rates of gain, on yields. These things should always be those typical measures because they're relatively easy to do. We've been doing them for generations. But clever nutritionists and vets should always be mindful of other positive impacts that are happening because you're providing good nutrition and have a proper microbial balance. Such things as resilience to stress, or improved behaviors, or lower group morbidity. If you look at things biologically, and if you could assess them, we believe you would see significant reductions in inflammation in the gut, and maybe even systemically. You would see better quality tight junctions and proper barrier functions. But relatively speaking, those things are impossible to measure in the live animal. So the typical measures of our industry are enough. We just need to remember that those are the consequences of providing good nutrients and having a balanced microbiome. They are the consequences of a greater percentage of that herd of dairy cattle or a lot of feedlot cattle or flow of pigs or flock of birds simply being normal. And normal is always the goal for production animal agriculturalists, but the consequences are better performance, better sustainability, and hopefully a chance at profitability.
So how would you say innovation in feed additives has evolved over the past few decades? I think it's probably increased, but what are you seeing and what's your perception?
Well, I look back at this and I'm going, oh boy, I've got a chart that goes over the last 50 years and I'm saying, and I was here for all of that. That's kind of, I find that humorous. But if you look back in the 60s, the majority of our solutions focused on the use of antibiotics. We use reactive chemistry to solve problems. If you look back then in about the 90s, we began using effective enzymes to release nutrients out of our feed a little better. In about the 2000s, we moved into the era of effective probiotics to help stabilize the gut ecosystem. Now we have postbiotics and other precision metabolites we can provide. And of course, we are looking towards a future where we take these advantages from antibiotics and enzymes and probiotics and precision metabolites, and we link them to a digital platform that, based on life cycle analyses, we can now say, when you provide these inputs, you're able to reduce the carbon footprint by X amount. You're able to reduce the amount of acres of cropland by Y amount. So being able to demonstrate a benefit not only in output of meat, milk, and eggs, but also an environmental impact and perhaps behavior, that is where we're going. So the industry went from reactive chemistry to proactive biology, and now beyond to in real-time dashboards to quantify the environmental impacts of our efforts.
Yeah, it's very neat to see how it evolves, and I'm sure it will continue to amaze us over time as well. Now, I know you like to speak about effective probiotics and what makes one probiotic different from another, but give us a refresher on that. Talk to us a little bit about what all that means exactly.
Well, it's the idea that it's never the genus or species of a microorganism that's important. It's invariably the strain. And a strain is an individual organism with its unique set of genetic gifts and all of its trillions upon trillions of nearly identical clonal copy. When you look at a strain, we say it is the strain that matters, because not all probiotics necessarily deliver the same array of potential benefits. It is the genetics of each strain that determines the enzymes that it produces, whether or not it forms spores effectively, whether it has the correct metabolic activity, or it imparts some benefit to the host. So I love to say effective probiotics, and I mean that it's a probiotic where you can consistently measure the results, whether that's better feed conversion, improve resilience to stressors, lower nitrogen loss, some benefit that's important within your operation. So it is never the label and the genus and species that matters. It's the evidence that the strain is effective that is most important.
Any practical examples of that you can share with us, kind of where this innovation has really made a difference?
Sure. We have a study on, for example, 1.2 million broilers across 39 different flocks over a year, where daily feeding of a triple strain probiotic, 3 different strains, each bringing its unique genetic gifts, had a significant improvement in feed conversion over 3 points, a 1.5% increase in carcass yield, reduced nitrogen loss. So clearly, that gain was a benefit not only to the producer, who with the same amount of feed got more pounds of broiler produced and reduced mortality and better yield, but if you turn that over to what did it do to the tons of carbon produced? Well, that was lower per pound of output. What about water use or land use to grow the crops to produce the feed? All of that is reduced. And anytime you can win on the biological side, the animals have a better peace of mind, a mental well-being, and have a positive environmental impact. That's a win-win-win scenario, and those are never bad.
And if you take what you've learned here, what you've seen the results, and you scale that up on a global level, kind of magnitude of an impact? What are we looking at? Have you taken a look at that at all?
Well, there's a small company. I'll mention their name. I'm hoping that your viewers have heard of them, but it's Alltech. They put out a 2024 global feed survey. In that survey, we produced about 1.4 billion metric tons of compound animal feed annually. If I look at the global impact of just 0.25% improvement in feed efficiency for those billions of metric tons, not 1%, not 5%, but 0.25%, we save 3.5 million metric tons of feed. You spare about 1.7 million acres of cropland you could use for something else. You avoid over 2 million metric tons of CO2 being produced into the environment. So clearly, on a global level, efficiency absolutely scales, I'll call it exponentially, because small biological gains certainly can accumulate over billions upon billions of animals and meals, however you want to quantify that. So the scale is tremendous. It's millions of acres. It's millions of tons of feed saved. It's millions of tons of CO2 and equivalents not being produced.
Yeah, those are definitely significant. Those are big numbers. So how do you properly quantify those types of impacts? Is there a good way to go about that?
I mentioned a moment ago these life cycle analyses, life cycle assessments, LCAs, where you can clearly link biological performance, use these life cycle analyses models to then predict what might happen when you make a choice. I'll give you a choice. Let's say you're a nutritionist who wants to use a phytase enzyme. That's part of your platform. So you can go and you can link the life cycle analyses for that phytase and what it does to the yield of phosphate and calculate how much phosphate mining you avoid, or the level of CO2 savings per ton of feed produced. And you can do this in real time so that every ton of feed a mill makes where a particular phosphatase enzyme is used, they can immediately calculate the amount of CO2 savings or phosphate mining avoided or water use or land use, whatever the metric is that's important to their customer base, and display that real time on a dashboard in the mill. It turns this invisible biological benefit of release of phosphate, and it puts it into a metric that the producer can report on. And perhaps more importantly than simply reporting on it, it becomes a repeatable, reliable metric that their customers and perhaps consumers will learn to trust. So you take these kind of tools and you make it a practical solution so that it can be effectively, safely, quickly applied. And it gives us a second set of important environmental metrics that link to a feed innovation at a feed mill.
Plus, it's very motivating to feed mill employees. They can see what their efforts are doing from a standpoint that they probably haven't thought about before. But when we talk about producers, what kind of economic returns are you seeing when you have these efficiency improvements?
Well, the immediate return must be a lower feed cost per pound of output, per pound of gain, per pound of milk produced, per pound of eggs. The feed efficiency absolutely must pencil out within the operation. It is really about the efficiency of production, but I'll bring back the idea that when everything is working well and you measure things like feed efficiency, one of the hidden benefits that also has tremendous economic impact is the reduction in variation within an operation, the improvement in the resilience of the animals in your care, that now they get a little bit of heat stress, but they're able to respond positively without any diminution in production. They may be able to better withstand crowding conditions or the occasional health challenge. And if they're getting more nutrients out of their feed effectively because of a feed innovation like effective probiotics or enzymes, then maybe they're able to allocate those resources to keep themselves sound in times of stress. For the producer, that means more consistent, more relied upon output from their particular operation. And consistency, reliability of supply, those are certainly winning metrics within animal agriculture. So we should not think about efficiency only as rate of gain, speed of growth, and feed efficiency, but also on the reliability of output in form of meat, milk, and eggs.
This all seems pretty straightforward, and it definitely makes it's good common sense. But why then are these principles? Why aren't they being adopted by everyone everywhere?
Well, I would love to know the real answer to that. I truly do know that this whole idea of sustainability, of efficiency, really only scales in animal agriculture when it makes sound business sense. If you look at improving efficiency and there is a cost to doing that, then that cost must absolutely pencil out at farm gate level. It's only when a feed innovation, an additive, a probiotic really provides that yield improvement in terms of gain or efficiency, and you can equate that to a reduction in carbon intensity or to a reduction in water use. But that is only important if the black and white of the equation works to the advantage of the producer and they don't have to use any red ink in their calculations. So when it scales is when the economics align with sustainability and they're not fighting each other. You're not making an uneconomical choice to reduce carbon output. They both have to go in the same direction for this to make sense. And I believe the most clever, the biggest, best businesses are seeing their way clear to quantifying many benefits of their choices, not only in carbon intensity because of feed efficiency, but in other metrics that make sense for that operation too. And when it is good for the producer, they don't have to worry about being only altruistic to benefit the environment. It now pencils out and they do it and they both benefit.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it just takes being able to step back and look at the whole picture. But so as we look forward, how will effective probiotics, precision metabolites, and digital integration reshape what's possible to achieve?
Well, we look forward at Novonesis, for example, we have started to begin talking about bioefficiency platforms and really looking at our multi-strain offerings as really these biological, microbiological consortia. You've got trillions upon trillions of organisms working within a digestive system. And when you can add in a consortium of bacteria that can benefit them, you add that to an effective enzyme, and now you have a biological platform that drives efficiency. We would argue you tie that through some clever use of life cycle analyses to align what you get in terms of benefit in the common metrics of our industries to how that translates to a benefit to the environment. And eventually provide digital linked systems that provide that feedback at farm gate level to the feed mill level, perhaps all the way through to the consumer, where they can see the impact of choices made by those producing food and what that means to the environment that we're living in.
So, with that in mind, do you then envision all of this happening within an organization, within a company, or more of a collaboration then, like across the whole value chain?
I believe in my core that collaboration is absolutely the key here. It's about how these data are shared and how the accountability is shared. Producers today are readily able to provide performance metrics. They can say, here's what I produced per square meter of barn space. It's nutritionists that will translate those metrics into a set of actions. They will use those metrics garnered from the producers to look at ingredient uses and to ingredient sources. They will look to quantify the outcomes in a sense of sustainability. And I personally believe and invest time in organizations like the American Feed Industry Association, or in the Institute for Feed Education and Research, iFeeder, or in the Global Feed LCA Institute, GFLI. And there's others like that I believe can be actively involved in a pre-competitive environment, if you will, to make sure that our methods are sound, that our conclusions are logical and can be validated. And then you add transparency, and from transparency comes trust. And those things should replace our silos and our slogans and talk about real progress being made where animal agriculture is seen as a value add in environmental stewardship rather than as a value minus. And that's where I'm hoping that collaborations will win the day and we'll all be on the same page looking for the global win. And that can happen only with collaboration in a pre-competitive space.
Yeah, well said. If you had one message for producers about feed efficiency, planetary health, what would it be?
Well, I just mentioned slogans, so let me offer one. Right, I would love to say when we feed animals more efficiently, we sustain the planet more effectively. And for me, efficiency is measurable, it's repeatable, it's scalable. Every ingredient choice, every feed innovation choice matters, because if you can make incremental gains, it's not just for the sake of profitability, but it's for the long-term resilience of animal food production. It is what our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will depend upon. So I think efficiency, to tie it back into the title, is really, or should become, a common language for progress in this area, whether that is for producers or for the consumer or for the planet on which we all depend.
Dr. Steve Lerner of Novonesis Animal Health BioSolutions, thank you so much for your insight here today. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Likewise, we appreciate all of you in the audience for joining us. Until next time, for Feedstuffs, I'm Sarah Muirhead.